difficult book to review. It's a very difficult author to follow. At the moment, he's very controversial because of not only what he has said about Palestine and Israel, but his clear idea of why Trump won and what was the consequence of 8 years of Obama and how it plays out in his mind, the theory that the American white population at the end of the day does go back to its original idea that this country was built by the whites and everybody else that came later or they were brought there are really not the true Americans. So that basically at the moment after Trump's victory, the course is on sort of a defensive pitch because right now everybody in America who did not support Trump are slightly on a defensive pitch. His last name is pronounced as Ta-Nehisi. Ta-Nehiri, Ta-Shahi kahiye Gujarati man. Ta-Nehisi kehvaye. His real pronunciation is Ta-Nehisi. Even though it's Ta-Nehisi, I kept on saying Ta-Nehisi until I asked Google how the hell to pronounce it, and of course I was taught. So, early life, is born in 1975 in Baltimore, Maryland. He is an American. His father was a Black Panther, the people who believed in the black movement during and after Martin Luther King, and a big follower. He was also a preacher and all of that. His mother was a teacher. He grew up in a household where any question he asked his parents, they gave him a book saying, read and you'll get an answer. Don't ask me questions, find out your answers. So from the age of 7, 8 years of age, he was always thrown back into the family's library or the bigger library and said, search for answers instead of asking stupid questions. You have to find your answers. That kind of got his mind into basically searching answers through documents, manuscripts, literature. He attended Harvard University. Harvard is a very interesting thing. After the blacks got freed in America, a black university was created, which was basically created by some white people. And initially it was black only university because no other university would accept free blacks. Not Stanford, not Yale. Stanford didn't exist then. Not Harvard, not University of Illinois, not University of Chicago. Nothing would take a black kid. And so they basically established this university. Now it's taking everybody in. But it's still the original manifesto of the university was that this is a place where blacks compete with blacks and others on equal grounds. And that's where he currently teaches writing. He's a professor of advanced writing. He's in love with words. He's in love with what he can do with words. He started as a journalist for Village Voice in Atlantic. He was an editor of Atlantic for many years. And a lot of his tremendously strong statements on American society came during his editorship. The Atlantic had a distinct New York, Boston liberal tilt, and I will call him Coates because the first name is kind of difficult to follow. So Coates was a major face of Atlantic during that time. He is a recipient of MacArthur Genius Grant and awarded the National Humanity Medal. His books authored in prior years are just phenomenal of what they have said. So I have read 2 of them. I can't claim I have read all of them. Between the World and Me is a letter written to his son, trying to make him understand what is it for a black man to grow up in America, where the society, don't take it for granted that things are equal, things are not equal. Don't take it for granted that if a policeman stops you on the way and he's a white policeman, you're going to get a fair shake. You may get shot down, your life is in danger. You must proactively defend yourself as a black person. Those were the lessons. And the whole book is about how do you grow up and how do you cope with it? How do you ask your questions and how do you get your answers? And that's what the whole book is, a love letter to the son who is growing up as a black boy. And of course, a much more advanced America socially than Coates grew up in or his grandparents grew up in. We were 8 years in power, we meaning Obama, the Obama coalition. So he looks at why Obama came to power. a black man, obviously, and why America accepted him, what was going on before, and after Obama, why the reaction moved to the white person in the race, even though Clinton was white and she was a woman. The reaction of the white majority, which was kind of recoiled at this idea of having a black man in White House, basically brought Trump back. And his current explanation is that that's again the reason why Kamala Harris lost, because she's seen as a black and she's seen as a woman, and Trump is back with the same feeling that it's us who rule, not anybody else. So his we were 8 years in power in analysis of why Obama years happened and what was the aftermath. Is it going to be a one time that in next 100 years another black person probably won't come in power? What's the role of an immigrant who looks browner than the white majority in the future that's evolving in America? Water Dancer is a fiction he has written about a girl who is growing up free in Black Africa. Message is this book. And those of you who have seen the movie Black Panther Wakanda, that's the basic author is, of course, his dream that there was a free black world with free black kings, technologically advanced, intellectually advanced, never slaves. Africa that was never visited by white people. Africa that was strong, powerful, intellectually and otherwise prosperous. That dream was Wakanda. And those books, they came out as comic books, but eventually the highly successful 1 and 2 movies happened. And the inspiration behind that was Court's dream that had the white man not arrived in Africa and not taken African slaves, and if Africa had been left to its own devices, it would not have been a backward world with a lot of problems. It was all created because the colonial powers decided to exploit Africa. I find the books that he has written as sort of a guide to understand his current book. The historical context of this book it's a very interesting theory here. Racism follows slavery. First you needed people as workers in cotton farms, in cotton growing areas, in sugar growing plantations. You needed people to build a new country. And obviously the slavery was there for thousands of years. The Egyptians had slaves and everybody had slaves, but suddenly they found west coast of Africa where all these people were sold by other Africans. It's not that somebody else went in and gave these people up. It was the other Africans who sold them for money, and the women were taken away separately in ships, this so-called Middle Passage, and they arrived here. But to justify their slavery, a consciousness evolved saying they deserve it, they are inferior, they are not equal to us. Okay? He bluntly says that today every black man in America and woman is part of a mass rape. Everybody has the DNA of a white man who raped a slave girl or a slave woman. And that's why most American blacks look lighter in skin than most African blacks in Nigeria or Kenya, because that was the result of every woman that was taken in on a ship eventually ending up bearing a mixed progeny. Even the mixed progeny was then slaves because they were born of a slave, and the legacy was handed on. Racism followed colonization. Further, the British came here. They found a wonderful country, rich with minerals, rich with diamonds, rich with money. The Mughal kings, when they looked at the puny British representative, England was a completely devastated, ideologically, financially bankrupt country. And here was the richest empire on earth. Only other richer empire was China, which was again on its own orbit. And they saw, okay, we need to get in here. And then we need to control these people. How do you control a country with 20,000 Britishers where the country is made up of 10 lakh citizens? Only by telling them, you are not equal to us. Black man gets thrown out of a club. Gandhi gets thrown out of a train. Black literature was useless. Indian civilization literature was useless. You had to study Shakespeare and you couldn't go back to your own literature. So for 300 years, their need to bring racism followed colonization. We needed to colonize, we needed your money, we need to loot you, but we can do this because we are superior, we are the white races. They created this whole craze in India of being whiter, whiting creams, whiting powder, you know. So ponds lagano thoda vadare gora thasho. Akhi life we all looked up to it. When we were younger and we're traveling, now it's probably, I mean, India is in a much more mentally powerful condition. But when we were younger and traveling abroad, Air India would treat Indians like dirt, and if you white people who were on Air India would be treated like Maharajas. First trip with my wife in 1972, I told her the real Maharajas are these 3-4 people who, when they wave and ask for a drink, everybody runs, and we wave and ask for something, they look and say, "Aap yahan kya karte ho?" So that was, we were left with that feeling of inferiority. Everything British was good, British weather must be good, British weather was terrible. I remember my father saying when it was a cold, nice evening, English weather lage nahi hai. Even the English weather most of the time was rainy hell, but the idea was that English things were good. And of course, racism was needed for blatant economic exploitation. You could not exploit a whole bunch of people without saying you are inferior. Your color of skin dictates that you need to be controlled. These are the things that basically drive courses psychology. This book is series of essays, 3 major essays, written to his students. So the audience in the first book was his son. This book is an audience, is all his students that have taken his courses, past and present. He's writing to them. And the first chapter is basically looking at his experience and his grappling with being treated as an inferior citizen of the United States. Of being African was being barely human at all. It required dehumanization. There was a guy named Josiah Nott who was a huge slave owner in 18th century, 19th century. He basically wrote books on Negrology, which basically said these are inferior people with inferior culture, savage people, barbarians. We are Christianity, and us will upbring them. This is good for them, because how would they have seen such a great culture like us? They deserve to be slaves, but they are also liberating them from their conditions in Africa. Since they are all adults here, he's the one who coined that the black women crave white men, and that every black woman inside, the slave had a desire to have a child with a white man. That whole thinking basically came from Josiah Nott. He coined the books, the label Negrology, and everybody, including Teddy Roosevelt, the president in early 19th century, not Theodore Roosevelt, not FDR, the Second World War guy, but the guy in the 1901. He went to Africa and came back saying these are barbarian, half-humanized people. They're not actually human, they're subhuman. And they deserve what they got. They're lucky that they are in America looking at all this progress. This is the President of the United States having that thinking. Race is inferior, hence enslavement, and of course their enlightenment. Immediately, okay. Same thing Cortes did for Latin America. He arrived, he destroyed them, the Aztec Empire, the Incas, Spanish language was imposed, Christianity was imposed, the original religions were thrown away. Everybody spoke Spanish, and the whole idea was again same thing. These are inferior people, these are Native Americans, Red Indians. They can be killed or converted, otherwise there is no other fate. That's another reason why they deny Darwin. Because Darwin says people evolved from ape, and how would such a great white race evolve from ape? They just, Adam and Eve story, they just, God plucked them from somewhere and they arrived here. Everything else on earth is for their enjoyment. They deny African Eve. My book that I reviewed 2 years ago. Yeah. Basically, there's one woman who was parent of everybody on earth, and basically all their progeny moved to Europe, to America, to Australia, to India, and there was an original Eve. Well, the current and the past people who believe in the white superiority say that is bunkum. We didn't come from Africans. If we had the same ancestors, how could we take some part of our ancestral background and make them slaves? We can't. We are different. We just arrived from heaven. We are God's people. These are not God's people. So the book goes into this particular first chapter is brutal. When you read it, you suddenly realize you've heard this before, and you heard this in many places. He goes back to most of the African slaves are supposed to have originated from Senegal. There's a place there. And all his life, his father tells him, if you want to ever understand our past, go to Senegal. You gotta see Senegal. जब आप लोग NRI छोकरा हो ત્યાં જન્મ્યા હોય 20 વર્ષ નીકળી ગયા અને મા બાપ કહે એકવાર ઇન્ડિયા જા તો અહીંયા બેઠા બેઠા યુટ્યુબથી ખ્યાલ નહીં આવે. You must visit India to know India. Same kind of thing his father kept saying, you must go to Senegal. So after, he's got a lot of mixed feelings about visiting Senegal, but he finally flies. As his flight is landing, he's afraid, he is petrified, he is hopeful, he is ecstatic, he sees the land, he sees the ocean, and doesn't know if he is psychologically ready to see Senegal, but he lands. And there are people, and then of course like Bombay, you come out and there are slums, and he says, maybe they are right, maybe we deserve, look at the way we manage our things look dirty, roads look dirty, people look, not dressed well, maybe they are right, maybe we deserve this only, maybe we don't emancipate. He gets into a hotel, is depressed like hell. Next day he goes and sees some young Dakar residents, husband and wife, child. They take him to a coffee shop, they open a bottle of wine with him, they talk about it, laugh about his existence, all his worries. They're not worried what they are thinking about in America. And he starts feeling a little lighter, and he starts feeling a little better about being in Senegal. And in Senegal, there are many memorials created to this particular journey. This particular memorial is, African slaves memorial, the people who were taken away. As he rightly points out, people whose future was stolen. They had a future, they had a home, they had a family, their future was stolen, the entire generation's future was stolen. So he visits this, and he takes a boat ride to an island called Gori Island. Gori Island is mythical in African American imagination. That's where everybody left America, for America. All slave ships boarded from Gori Island. छोकरियों छुट्टी ले जाता स्त्रियों ने. The women were taken separately, men were taken separately. So these slave ships had women who were supposed to go and perform a different function. And able-bodied men were on other ships. They were taken separately. Family were split apart. Children, if they looked old enough, they were taken together. They were seen too young and be a nuisance on the woman to take care of. They were left there or killed as they were leaving. So the Gori Island has a mythical place. Like every society has. We have a mythical place of Dwarka, and we imagine in our mind this is how it was. So this is Gori Island. The Gori Island is that as a memorial center where most of the ships took off. And he has a very, very interesting experience. He goes to the water, he walks around, takes a guide. The guide takes him for a ride thinking he's an American, so sells him some really expensive stuff for some money. He doesn't mind spending money because he says, okay, these African guys are getting money, and to me this is $2-3, what do I care? So like a tourist, he walks around, then he says, I don't want the tour guide, I don't want anybody, I want to just walk. So he walks around, goes to the ocean and puts his hand and feet there. Then he starts to feel calm, and then he sees that on the other side somewhere is his America. On the other side somewhere, far, far away, is the coast of America, which he left behind, and he starts crying. For the first time, he sits down in the water, while he's feeling calm, while he's feeling mixed emotions of Gori Island. He's starting to cry, looking at America, saying, okay, that's the coast for which they left. They were promised a new life, this is where they were snatched from. And then in his mind comes an interesting allegory. Goree Island versus Ellis Island. Ellis Island, where the free white people arrived, the Statue of Liberty place in America, where said, bring your oppressed, bring your hungry, we will take them. And the whites from, whites from Ireland, from England, from wherever, there was a Christian persecution, and first the Anglo-Saxon arrived, then subsequently others arrived, Italians, Polish. It kept on arriving, America kept on receiving, it was a country of immigrants. But these were the people who were going to displace the Native Americans. And then these are the people who were taken from another island, Goree Island, but they were taken completely against their wish. So one was a forced departure, and one was a warm welcome to a new country. Both arrived as future Americans, but in totally different circumstances. And he realizes that you need mythological places. Goree Island was nothing. At the same time, he says, for collective black imagination, you need Goree Island to say, okay, there was something we left behind, and there was some value to that life. The last chapter is very interesting. I think I'm missing a slide here, but maybe I'll find it in a wrong order. So let me see if I have that. There's a lady named Mary Wood. She's a white teacher in South Carolina. South Carolina, where at the height of slavery, it was the center of Confederacy. The South Carolina was where most of the slavery's defense took place. South Carolina was where the entire defense against the North was planned when Civil War started. And South Carolina till today, almost during pandemic, they took down the Confederacy flag which fought against Lincoln from their state house. South Carolina is heart of the slave kingdom. And there was a white teacher named Mary Wood who was teaching one of the course books, Between Me and My World, or whatever, the letter to his son. And she was asked by the school board to stop teaching that book because it was basically painful for white boys and girls to listen to this. It caused them humiliation, shame, and it was not worthy of curriculum. And interestingly, she was only teaching a writing class, showing them how he wrote and how words mean things. But she was basically asked by school board to either stop teaching or resign and go away. And there was a big battle going on because there was going to be a court case against her for teaching inflammatory things. And again, remember, this is a white woman in her 40s who has decided to teach courts, not even a black woman, so it's not part of a black movement. So Coates talks to her. He's very hesitant. He said, I don't want to get involved in this. My books are not about this conflict. But nonetheless, he calls her, and she sounds genuine. And he gets really concerned. He said, okay, I'm going to fly to South Carolina. So he goes there. In the school board meeting the day before, he spends time with her family, her grandmother. Everybody has read his book. This is a staunch family that believes in American liberal values, right in heart of extremely conservative America. And so she basically takes him with him to the school board. In the meantime, whatever little social media existed in those years, they had spread the word that he's going to be there. And people who want to come in support of Mary Wood must come in blue t-shirts. And so the whole town turned up, and there were more blue t-shirts than anybody else. And when the vote was taken for the school board, the vote was turned down that she should stop teaching this class or that she had any fault in bringing this book into the curriculum. And so he goes back, and then he's telling his students in the chapter here, it's very important to use the right words. It's very important to continue writing about it. Because if you can't see this, it's not going to be seen by anybody else. The most controversial chapter is the last one. This is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So he goes as a committed supporter of Israel. Like most Americans, he thinks Israel is the right. He has read the Holocaust stories, he has seen the Holocaust movies, he has heard the Jewish side of the story. He visits Palestine fully buying into the story. Israel is a victim of persecution, Holocaust, deserves its own state, is noble and equitable towards its barbarians who are stateless, unredeemable Palestinians. It is a story that Israeli army fights with tears in his eyes because they don't like to kill, but nonetheless, what they have to do, what they so lions with tears. He has heard that story. He has seen the pictures, and of course, that's the only functioning democracy in that part of the world. So that is another story that America hears constantly, and of course, he's also heard it, and he's part of it. But once he's there, he starts seeing the difference between how Palestinians live and how Israelis live. How world is barbed wire for Palestinians and a free world for Israelis. And he starts to draw parallel between apartheid for blacks in South Africa and systemic oppression of blacks in America and what the Palestinians must be going through every day. So again, you have to take a pinch of salt here because he has been invited to this country to visit by something called Palestine Literary Festival. If I do, when I read the book, I didn't really get the thing, but his guided tour through checkpoints, settlements, occupied Palestine is either by white Israelis who are very favorable to Palestinians, who don't think Israel is right, or by Palestinians themselves. So he's hearing that story. Okay, depends on whose story you hear to empathize. I read about Palestinian Literary Festival of that year, and other countries or people who were invited were from South Africa, from Kashmir. So all of the people who basically felt disenfranchised or trod upon were there. So you can see that his host must have invited him knowing his literature and using him to basically bring their story out. He's a storyteller and they're going to use it. So he gets told all these anecdotes, and the book goes on, and that is one essay that is long and very difficult to read. But the Israeli government has divided Palestinians in uninvolved versus involved. So every house is a number in which Palestinians live. And if the family has never been involved in anything against the Israeli state, any publication, any demonstration, then they are called uninvolved. And their homes, the Israeli Defense Force takes over because they're less likely to be attacked there. And they hide inside and then they attack, watch the involved ones. But the people who are uninvolved and actually are very good citizens of Israel now have soldiers sitting in their home with guns and children all petrified. So they said this is the way we are dealt with. Even we are uninvolved and neutral, we then invite the army into our house and they eat and dine with us and we are kind of stuck with them. There are lots of anecdotes about, checkpoints and how white tourists get through and he gets blocked because he's black, and until he tells them that his grandparents were, he's not a religious guy, he doesn't believe in God, his parents don't believe in God. But he said, my grandparents were Christians, so they let him through. He said, if I had said I'm a Muslim, black Muslim, I would have been denied going into Al-Aqsa Mosque, even though it's a Muslim mosque, but they would have basically blocked him. So he realizes that if you have an American passport, doesn't get him access everywhere because he's black. They look at him and say, and he said the person who stopped me was a black Jewish soldier. So there are also blacks in Israel who are Jewish. And he said, until I said I'm not a Muslim, they wouldn't let me get through. So those are the stories he tells. But then, being a very good storyteller, he ends his visit by visiting the Holocaust Memorial in Israel. He spends the whole day. These are granite slabs of room size. And there are 6 million names written of all the Jews killed by, and there are movies about it, there are testimonies about it. And he walks through and he's numbed by the amount of cruelties the Israeli faced. And he sits down at the end saying, I can't handle this anymore. And he sits and says, okay, they deserved a place to be their own. They deserve to really at one place have their say, but they did displace Palestinians who were living here. And the story has, if you look at Israeli side of the story, there is one element of justification that they were the oppressed, harassed, people from all over the world, and they finally had a home. And look at the story from Palestinian side, and they were the persons who had a home, and now suddenly since 48 were homeless. But in my mind, in that particular reason I went back to see what Palestinian Literary Festival was he was not against the Israeli government, he would have gotten a different tool. Thou dost protest too much, he's too much into the Palestine story and doesn't really talk about the Intifada, the bomb attacks in Tel Aviv, the things that happened to Israelis where the checkpoints started to happen. So there is other side of stories that they have tried to eliminate Israel for a long time. It's surrounded by extremely hostile country, and it exists the way it exists because there is a history here. But at the same time, it's an extremely difficult part. This guy is a writer. You have to remember that long after his books are forgotten, his quotes will remain because he's remaking the American Black story with his quotes. The first one, from haunted to ghost. He felt haunted by all the stories of black slavery. He now become ghost for the people who are reading his books who are white. Okay, haunted by words to haunting by it. Every word he uses is like a weapon. So you have to realize the book is actually meant to provoke. Book is actually meant to create a reaction. This is not a book that is saying, I'll give you both sides of the story and I'm kind of neutral here. Saying, okay, react. I'm asking you to react. Statues and pageantries can fool you. So he goes, after he visits Marywood, he goes to the state house of the state of South Carolina. And there are statues of people who were slaveholders, people who fought Civil War on the side of the slavery. And he goes through all these statues and he looks at the people, the person I quoted earlier, Josiah, not the guy who wrote about Negrology, standing there, holding his books in his hand, a huge black statue. And he says, this is very interesting, British did that, they had statues and pageantry. We did this now, do this now. Statues and pageantry can fool you. They look like symbols of wars long settled, fought on behalf of men long dead. But their redemption is not about honoring a past, but is about killing a future. Very important. His whole idea is that everything that is being done and said in service of white supremacy is killing future for the black Americans and darker skin Asian immigrants, because while Vivek Ramaswamis of the world don't really realize it, they're not actually on the same level as Trump's other acolytes. And of course he uses Israel's own words. Israel has said since the Second World War, never again. This will never happen to Jews again. And he during that visit to Palestine, he keeps looking at saying, can we ever say these words on behalf of Palestine, saying never again. So again, this is the turning the slogan of Israel. This is again a brilliant piece. True peace is not merely absence of tension, but it's presence of justice. Again, this will last much longer than him. This is this middle one is something that really touched me. History is not inert, but contains within it a story that implicates the present. Present is all of the people present are complicit in the history that happened because they're part of it. Tradition of writing is indispensable to our future, if only because what must be cultivated and cared for must be seen. If you can't see it, you can't cultivate it, you can't cultivate a world opinion. So I think this is a very personal book, personal essays. If you YouTube quotes Ta-Nehisi, you will see tons of videos, people attacking him. He's on CNBC, he's on MSNBC, he's on CNN, Fox News thinks he should be killed or something, because it's basically, he has created a lot of backlash. But at the end of the day, he basically says you need empathy in your heart and courage in your heart to confront uncomfortable truths. And somebody has to say uncomfortable truths. That's basically his journey. If those of you are interested in his current thoughts on Trump, Atlantic has an article in 2017 where he basically says that when Obama gets elected, and then Trump comes back, and Trump gets elected 2016, how the white America negates Obama's legacy, how there is a reaction. Remember when Trump came to first time in power, before that he kept saying, I don't think he's American. He looks like African. He was born in Kenya. Does that mean? That means it doesn't look like us. What is a black man doing in White House? Okay, that's the message. But to say it is that I want to see his birth certificate. What's the meaning of that? That means you are not an American because you don't look like us. How dare you be in White House? So that basically and still Obama won because Obama was Obama. Again, one-time storyteller, phenomenal speaker. But that Trump's return was negation of that legacy. So if you go to, just Google Ta-Nehisi and Donald Trump and Atlantic, you'll see this brilliant piece. Whether you agree with it or not, I mean, there are a lot of their things there. He's sort of uni-focused. Even Trump won right now because of immigrants coming in through Mexico and economy and million other things. Not just because of this, but in his mind, this is crucial. These are my thoughts after I finish the book. I agree, racism does follow colonization, but slavery has bypassed colonization and simply stole a future of a huge group of people. And reparations financially are simply not enough. They would have been somewhere else doing something else and they were taken. Nations are established by force. There is no justice in how nations are established. There is only one example that Gandhi established, and that was a nation was taken by justice. And a lot of other nations followed because what Mahatma Gandhi did here through non-violence and the freedom struggle established independent India, and so many other countries then got independence simply through justice of the argument. Before that, whether it was Alexander defeating Darius and destroying Persepolis, or whether it was Ashok killing 10% of adult men during Kalinga War before he found Buddhism, whether it is the Muslim conquests that came through the Somnath destruction, the subsequent ones, the Lodhis, the Mughals, one Muslim replacing the another, the Hyderabad, was all plunder, destruction, but they were better arms, they were better soldiers. Nalanda might have been a phenomenal library, but culturally brilliant civilization have fallen to completely barbarian but fantastic war machines. So countries have been formed simply by force. India and its independence was completely rare, and that's why it's extremely precious. British conquest was for plunder. The East India Company came here to establish business, steal money. They needed power, then they got power. Then of course England stepped in after 1857 riots, and a country acquired, but basically it was for money. And the richest country on earth was plundered into poverty, and that basically was the reason for their arrival. But all of these stories have one thing in common, and that is that to justify this, a degree of racism was created. In America, before the slavery, he talks about basically the Native Americans. They were completely thrown out. They welcomed Americans on Thanksgiving at the Plymouth Rock with a turkey and a corn dinner. And next 200 years, they were wiped out, killed, diseases introduced, smallpox introduced into Native American populations. Their food was the buffalo, wild buffalo in the plains of America. And American army was asked to shoot and kill, and nearly 3 million buffaloes were shot so that the Indians would starve to death because they didn't know how to do agriculture. And they were basically slowly starving because their food was being destroyed. So the entire story of, and at that time also basically the story was that they are inferior, they are savages. We need to bring this country up, bring it to the white Anglo-Saxon standards. And the entire destruction of a pre-existing American civilization. Right now they talk about immigrants coming in droves. Well, immigrants came in droves and destroyed original Indians, original Americans. They are the ones who were living there for thousands of years. I have only one comment about quotes when I read all this. He has Ambedkar's anger. He has Martin Luther King's vocal elegance. but he lacks the compassion that Gandhi had. So he's a leader in terms of his current position, of these things he writes and does, in terms of, one can compare him to MLK, one can compare him to Ambedkar. One can't compare him to Mahatma Gandhi because he lacks compassion. He lacks ability to see the other side. Gandhi, when he was dealing with British, always, he never wanted to hurt them, never wanted to be violent towards them. And there is a story in one of his books where he is in jail and the jailer is a white guy. His child falls sick and he seems very worried, and Gandhi basically asked to be relieved for a day or two so he can take care of the sick child. That's how his mind worked, and the jailer completely gets converted to Gandhism because he has not really realized that this was possible in their lifetime. Again, my 2 cents, all my mentors in USA have been Jewish. I have not seen. American Jews have not been color conscious in my experience. The people who have been least racist in my experience, the whites, have been Jews.
Oh, really?
From the first day in Chicago in 1973, my Jewish mentor called me son. He would simply say, son, I need you in the hospital. Such and such guy has fallen sick, and I would run there and take care of whatever was needed. But until he died in 2003, I respectfully called him Dr. B. To me, he would pick up the phone and say, son, what the hell is going on? Why aren't you here? Whatever, I was in India and my flight got cancelled and I telegrammed in. In those days there were telegrams. So I sent saying, flight cancelled, lost passport, blah, 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 can't come. So the telegram came back saying, I hope you're right, because otherwise you will have hell to pay, son. That was, those are the Jews.
There were 2 more sons. One was Pakistani, other was Italian.
Italian. There were 3 people training under him. One was Pakistani, other was Italian. And all 3 were sons to him. And that's why I worked in a Jewish hospital. And the entire white staff, entire white doctor staff that became my friends and subsequently took care of some of them, were the biggest supporters of Indians. They were totally color unconscious, and having been discriminated all their life as Jews, they were very sensitive to your feeling like you were being discriminated. So I don't agree with him. I think Israel, they were big supporters of Black civil rights movement. The Black movement in America, Black Lives Matter, civil rights movement, had one big supporter. That was the American Jew. American Jew was part of the liberal coalition that always stood up for Martin Luther King, what anybody else. Barack Obama got some of his most phenomenal support from American Jews. So until the last attack on Israel and its ferocious response, the coalition was won, but it split. Because the blacks somehow saw the Palestinian story and went after it. That's one of the reasons why Kamala Harris lost Jewish support, because they basically saw her being soft on Palestine and somewhat equivocal on Israel. And the phenomenally strong black Jewish coalition in America is right now fractured. Both are not very happy the outcomes of the current election, but both are on a different path. For the moment, the coalition has suffered, but I think that his reading of Israel and his reading of Palestine was too one-sided. He's gone from one angle. His tour was guided by people who had one kind of philosophy to tell, and he decided to tell one type of story because it fit with the narrative of segregation and slavery. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Divyesh Mehta, for a very comprehensive review, including your own personal takes of a rather difficult book. Because see, it's written in the essays form.
Yes.
While citing his personal anecdotes and all, and probably I don't know, from whatever little I read of the book, it's not very easy to fathom his logic.
Yes.
Not very easy. I found it little difficult or hard. Not necessarily you may agree or may not agree. Of course, he cannot be Mahatma Gandhi because he doesn't have that kind of leadership quality. Forget about the compassion and all those things. That's true. Even the compassion in some ways Ambedkar did have.
Yes. No, Ambedkar has zero comparison
Yes,
for
exactly, yeah.
people who
So,
are not supporting.
I'm not trying to compare or try
No.
to belittle Ambedkar. In fact, we are indebted to him for so many other
Yes.
things, but not for that. So, on that note, sorry, I have a bad throat. House is open for Q&A, and
Any comments, any questions?
Any comment,
Doesn't
questions?
have to be, but yes.
please, yes.
So, I